Hello, fabulous friends and fans. Welcome to Synchronicity University. I am your astrologer, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. This video is on Saturn in the sign of Gemini in the natal chart, or Saturn in the third house in the natal chart, or Saturn transiting through the third house of the natal chart. So we'll take it one at a time. Now, in modern Western astrology, there's a natural connection that takes place between the sign of Gemini and the third house. So if you have Saturn in Gemini, you'll relate to some of the third house matters I speak about. However, you are going to want to watch the video specifically aimed at the placement of Saturn by house in your unique chart. Now, the same is true vice versa as well. You will relate to, if you've got Saturn in the third house, some of the Gemini stuff I talk about, but please do make sure to watch the video that has to do with the unique placement of Saturn in your chart based on sign and again by house. Now, if you have Saturn transiting through the third house, you will relate to some of the stuff that people go through who have Saturn natally in the third house. So the issues that people deal with or the learning that people go through at several points throughout their life as part of their life path will visit you for a time. But there are also some unique issues as part of a unique journey that happens when Saturn enters the third house. And of course, I'll talk about that as well. So let's take it one at a time. Saturn in the sign of Gemini. Now, Gemini has to do with the processing of information. So it has to do with how it is that you are, whether it's perceiving information, processing the information, what is it that you are understanding, especially on a level of mind. It isn't so much necessarily about the philosophical meaning that you make out of it. That's much more the opposite sign of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is concerned with philosophical implications. In the sign of Gemini, it becomes much more about the process of actually speaking and communicating in general, and also how it is that you are receiving the communication of others is a part of this as well. And so wherever Saturn is in a chart, it does tend to represent limitation in early life, particularly limitations before you have your Saturn return. And then once you turn 30, so the Saturn return, as I spoke about in the overview video for this series on Saturn, so you will want to watch that introduction video. The Saturn return happens like usually around 28 and a half, but it can vary. So it can happen between basically 27 and by the time you turn 30, Saturn return is good and behind you, okay? So the Saturn return is officially over. You enter adulthood. You are an adult once you hit 30, astrologically speaking, numerologically speaking. And once you do, okay, once Saturn has moved over the place it was when you were born and moved on, that is when you start to tap into the more higher understanding of that Saturn in your chart, which ultimately is there to help you to utilize that energy by sign, to move yourself towards the higher goals you may have for your life, to move you towards creating a legacy that you can be proud of, to move you towards greater self-respect and a greater ownership for your happiness as well. So that's what being a grown-up is about, right? Being a grown-up is taking responsibility for your life and doing the best with what it is that you are and what it is that you have. And so with Saturn in the sign of Gemini, what I have found is sometimes there can be some limitations in the early part of life where it comes to how either you are receiving information or how you are communicating information. Now this can really sort of vary dramatically, right? So it could be all the way to some sort of impediment to learning. That can be part of this. But it can also just be that you have your own sort of unique way of learning, or that you find yourself really bored, or it's difficult to take a real handle on the way in which material is being taught. And it may not necessarily be that there is some sort of learning disability, but just that you have to find your pathway to understanding yourself and what you need in order to learn best. And so these are also going to be people who, as part of this, because they do their best learning the older they get, As part of this, they may be engaged in some sort of process of learning at different phases throughout their life. So at various stages of life, they're going to be asked to take on new skills, to learn more, to be willing to take classes, maybe night classes, maybe learn new computer programs as they go along. So rather than this being something kind of organic, they will go through these processes at different points in life to keep learning, as part of more fully understanding how they can take what they learn, the skills that they learn, and actually apply them towards making progress in their life. Whether that progress is defined as aligning themselves with a higher purpose or aligning themselves with a sense of life purpose, or whether that is about just, career progress. They just want to make career progress. They want to do well. They want to keep getting promoted. That can also just be part of it on a very literal level. Now, as I said, sometimes the learning, right, how they're processing information in early life can be a factor. Sometimes it's how they're communicating, like they need some time to figure out how to communicate effectively as well. Now, it isn't just about effectively. What I have found with this also is either there can be some sort of a misunderstanding or a disconnect with the people that they are learning with as well, or communicating with, especially in the early part of life. So these can be people who are like smarter. If that Saturn is positively aspected throughout the chart, then these are going to be people who likely are much more sophisticated, much more adult in their thinking at a young age. And their desire for learning can also be at an older level as well. These can be people who want to know more. Like they're the ones who are asking for more assignments. They're the ones who want to read books that are several grades ahead as part of fueling this desire that they would have to learn and to occupy their mind, really. And they can also have that sense of diligence, like they could actually have the patience to read because they have that inner stability that allows them to process information that now more and more, less and less people are reading books in the traditional sense. We're gathering our information differently. We're taking our information more and more in bite size. And the art of being able to read a book from beginning to end, and especially a text that is, extensive from beginning to end, is becoming something that is less and less indulged. But with these people, they actually can. If you've got Saturn in Gemini, the patience is there, the diligence is there, and also the understanding of how to follow along with an extended storyline or extended sort of presentation of ideas. They have that ability to follow along over an extended period of time, what otherwise could be somewhat complex. Now, third house, as I said, is also about like talking, right? About communicating. So in early life, also part of the learning could be that they have to learn to be responsible with how they're communicating. How is it that their words are affecting other people around them? And so I, again, have seen this, that people with a Gemini placement, Saturn in Gemini, may have to go through the lesson of gossip and understanding that gossip ultimately is something that can be hurtful to people. And so they may in early life indulge in that, and then very early, or at least by the time they hit the Saturn return, they start to understand that it isn't just about they can't get away with it, but just that the consequences of that tend to be more for them than they would necessarily be for someone else. So the consequences that arise out of gossiping tend to be so undesirable that by the time they hit adulthood, they understand that that's something that they should not do and do not want to do. And they come to understand that they have a need to structure what they're sharing, not just in alignment with who they're speaking to, but also what should be shared and what should not be shared, to have that level of integrity with their words. Now, Saturn natally in the third house. Now, the third house has to do with siblings and cousins and neighbors. It has to do with our immediate community, like the community we live around. So again, our neighborhood, for example, is what our sort of condominium that we live in. This is third house stuff, okay? And so these are people who likely in early life had to play a more mature, adult, possibly parental role with their siblings or their cousins. So regardless of where they are in that dynamic, in the sort of spectrum of the family. These are people who likely had to be the older one because they were the responsible one, if you will. So they likely had to take on that role of being the responsible one and being more responsible, being more adult, filling in when the adults weren't in the room as part of the dynamic that they played out in their families, especially in the early part of life. These can also be people who are continually kind of pulled into having to do work and volunteer work within their immediate communities as well. So this is, the tenants committee, right? These are people who are going to get roped into that or are going to want to participate in that. They're going to want to have a say in how it is that their buildings are coming along, how renovations are going, and also in the immediate community as well. So these are people who are going to get involved at the level of, this is what we see like the PTA, right? The PTA people, they can have Saturn in the third house because they feel, and especially once you have a kid, you really feel that sense of responsibility, right? For a lot of people out there, having a kid is very Saturnian because that's when you take on that authority, that parental role that can be very much the voice of authority. So having a kid tends to activate Saturn in the chart. And so these are people who, if they've got Saturn in the third house, they're going to get involved at the level of the school community as part of that Saturn being awakened thanks to their child, as part of being an authority figure to their child as well. So they'll get involved on the level of school activities. They'll get involved in their immediate communities as well. Now, these can also be people who, even among like their neighbors and stuff as well, have to take more of a leadership role also. Now, these are also going to be people who, just like with the sign of Gemini, different times in life are going to have to take on processes of learning as well. So they'll find themselves having to take on new skills. They'll find themselves having to take a class here and there. How that Saturn is placed will say a lot about how they feel about that process. Now, if you are somebody who's experiencing Saturn moving through the third house, now this is what I found with Saturn transiting through the third house. It tends to bring with it a desire to find your voice, to find what it is that you desire to express and to get serious about expressing it. So there is a phrase, or I don't know who actually made the statistic, but I remember reading it a long time ago that said, out of every 10,000 people who want to write a book, only one will actually write that book. And out of 10,000 books that get written, only one will actually be shared in any kind of meaningful way. It will actually be published, whether self-published or through a publisher. So I thought that this was a really interesting statistic. I'm guessing it's kind of a metaphor, but it might be closer in accuracy. I'm not sure. But having said that, a lot of people want to write a book for a lot of different reasons. And it's mostly because, well, one reason is that a lot of us feel, rightly so, that we have a story to tell. But also, especially with Saturn moving into the third house, it becomes about, this is part of my legacy. I want to document something that will actually be part of like what I achieve, or that I had something to say, or that I contributed something, or that my life mattered in the bigger picture. Of course, every life matters in the bigger picture, but this becomes more about expressing that, documenting that in some way. And it might be about your own life, it might be about an idea that you have, or it might be just something you desire to teach. Third house has to do with teaching as well. But regardless, this tends to be a time when that desire to share something is awakened and people get serious about sharing it. So if you have that book that's waiting to be written, this is when you get serious about actually starting to write it, putting aside that 30 minutes a day, 5 times a week to actually get something done. If you have something to teach, then this becomes a time when you start thinking, how can I do that? What is it that you can put together, a proposal? How are you going to make that happen? Is there something you need to learn? Is there, do you need to learn how to teach in order to teach what you desire to? All of these things become a factor. Who do you need to reach out to in order to do that? What needs to happen? All of these become a factor. Now, this is Saturn. Saturn will meet you where you are and will ask that you give in order to receive. So the proportion with which you give is the proportion with which you get back. Saturn is rewards, but it's rewards that you work for. So If you are somebody who has, who's not into reading, who's not into writing, you decide you want to write a book, you may write that book, and that's awesome. And what I have found with this is, as I said, the universe will meet you where you are. So you will get feedback on that. You will come to understand how it is that you can make progress, how it is that you can refine that. Now, I do want to say, again, the universe will meet you where you are. If you've never written a book and you've never been into writing, and you write a book, now it's very, very common, you'd be surprised among those of us who've actually written books. It is very, very common that the first book you write never sees the light of day. The first book you write tends to be a trial run. And then that sort of teaches you something about the writing process, about your writing process, about what you have to share. And it encourages you to learn and interact with other people and go through the process of understanding what it means to actually do that before you decide what it is ultimately that you are going to end up sharing. And normally what we do for the first time isn't anywhere near what it is that ultimately we truly want to do. You have to do something more than once in order to be good at it. So what does happen, I've seen this, Saturn moving through the third house, you may write that book, but it may end up being the book that doesn't see the light of day, but does set the foundation for you to actually write the book that does end up being something that you share. So you have to be open to that part of the process as well. In the beginning, remember, you're starting in the beginning. So this is going to show you where you are, but you're slowly being taken on a journey. And towards the end of it, you may actually have that book that you are ready to share. And same thing goes if you've never taught anything in your life, never been in front of people, then Saturn's going to meet you where you are. Start giving you those opportunities, start getting you to think about what's involved in teaching as you slowly refine your pathway forward to actually having that class, to having people who want to learn from you as well. So it's a slow journey, yes, but you and I both know, especially if you've had your Saturn return, you blink and that 3 years will go by really, really fast. So Saturn will take you on that journey and ultimately help you to refine your voice, help you find your voice and then refine that voice so that you really can establish yourself as saying something with authority and actually being an authority at what it is that you are sharing as well. Well, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm truly so grateful that you are here. I love our interactions. Please keep them coming on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, my website, nadiyashah.com, and the YouTube comments as well. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. So grateful for this moment with you. Until we connect again, take care. Thank you for watching this lesson as part of Synchronicity University. You can go online at synchronicityuniversity.com or click on your screen if you're on YouTube right now to access even more video lessons, to access horoscopes, interviews with some of the most amazing astrologers in the world, and so much more.